Hi, welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. This is the new addition to our family. Her name is Zena. You might hear her fuss a little bit in the background. Hopefully not. I think it's almost time for her nap, but we'll see. It's hard to tell with puppies. She's almost 9 weeks old now. She's a cutie, but she can get into quite a bit of trouble in a little bit of time, as I'm sure that you know all about. So today, we're finishing our 2023 Seaside Quilt A Long. So if you've been following along, and I've already bound my pages that I printed, this is our quilt. In just a moment, I'm going to let her outside. So, when I put mine together, as I was showing you in the one of our previous tutorials, I was showing you how we can switch it around. So this is our pattern, and I switched around one of the sashings so that I could create this section here, which gives me a rectangle to be able, that's offset a little bit but centered, but it doesn't have, you know, like the black over here, but it gives me a space to do maybe a center focus feather. So when I'm creating my quilts, I also try to think about what I'm going to want to long arm on them. So I did change the position of some of the blocks. Now in the teal one that I'm doing, which is half done, or a little bit more than half done now, I'm doing that one exactly by the pattern. All the blocks will be in the exact order. With this one, I changed them up and I moved some of the blocks into different positions. That way I'll end up with two quilts that are quite similar, but at the same time different. And also, which I hadn't realized was going to happen when I was repositioning these, and when I changed the sashing here, the effect that I got was this lighter blue diagonal section here of blocks. And then, so there's 5 there, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's a diagonal of 4, but has then another blue here that's offset, but then goes into a diagonal of the lighter blue. So that kind of gives it a neat effect. It changed it up a little bit, and then there's like 1 in each corner. So I really like how that went together and turned out. And I just kept turning blocks and moving them into different positions until I was satisfied with what I was looking at. And I take pictures in between. So mostly because, and I hang them up, and then I take the pictures, and mostly that's because when you take a picture, you can see the view a little bit differently, and you can see how the different colors are playing into each other. And I just find it very, very helpful. So I'm going to remind you, for the most part, this is doing our borders. I've gone over borders several times now in several different tutorials. So I'm going to refer you back. I'm going to give you some basic information, but if you want to see more of what's going on, you can go to the Easy Panel Borders under Quilting Tutorial, or Quilting Tutorials, or I think it's Quilting Techniques and Tips. Either one of those, you can find that. And basically, what I do is I measure, well, first you're going to measure your width and length usually and figure out how much binding you're going to need. And we'll do that in just a moment. But for my first border, since I've already got this spread out, I'm going to go down the center and measure. And so that's pretty much 74.5 inches. So I've done it in the center. I'm going to check my side and see if it's measuring the same or not. And that's 74.5 there. And I'm going to check it one more time down here. Now, if I end up with 3 measurements the same, that's lovely. It's a wonderful day. It means everything's squared up nicely for me, which would make me super happy. Doesn't always happen. Here's the ta-da moment. Let's see what happens. And it's pretty close to the 74.5. So this side I think is off like maybe 1/8 of an inch. And the center was pretty darn on the 74.5, and down there it was just a smidget off the 74.5. So I'm going to go with the 74.5 as the consensus for what measurement I'm going to use on my sides. And I'm going to write that down, because if I don't, I will definitely forget. Now the other measurement that you're going to want to take, while we're right here, and I just set my tape measure down somewhere. One would wonder how you lose a tape measure when you haven't even left your spot. But I did it. Okay. Oh, I set it on the ironing board. So we know it's 74.5 long. So let's find out what it measures in width. And that's 48.25. So to find out how many strips I'm going to need, and I am going to do this and I don't know what my pattern was showing because it was just a quick design. At this point, you can decide the width of your borders however you want them. My first border I'm going to do I'm going to cut it at 2.5 inches, and it will end up being a 2-inch finished border around. And I'm going to use the black because it will, in my opinion, help make this pop. And I'm going to be using the blue belly chops for the last border. And I'll decide on my cornerstones when I get to my last border. So to figure out how many strips you need to cut, you would add your width and your length together, you would multiply that by 2. And then you will add 10, and that's the little bit of extra that you need when you're fitting your borders in. That was for the binding. Wait a minute, sorry about that. I used pretty much close to the same method. I don't know what I'm thinking today. So you would go, I was thinking binding. So just go your width and your length, add those together, times them by 2, and then you'll know how many strips you need to cut for your border. And then the rest of the math that goes with that is for the binding at the end. So we're just going to do our first 2 borders. Do your left side and your right side, doesn't matter which you start with, but do your 2 sides, and then come back and remeasure your width, because your width is going to change and should change by 4 inches, because there'll be a 2-inch border this side and a 2-inch border this side, so it should be adding 4 inches to your width. And for me, that would bring me up to 52.25. But I will remeasure it to be absolutely sure. And the other thing that I do the same thing. I measure the top, the middle, and the bottom to get all 3 measurements. And I'm going to use the most common one for my cutting. So I will cut both sides 74.5, and this is going to help square it up. So when I do my width on the top and the bottom, and get my true measurement for that, that's going to help square up my quilt. So go ahead and put your first border on. If you need more reference, go to the Easy Panel Borders, and I'm going to add my first border, and then we'll be back and we'll talk about measuring for our next border, and also how we will put our cornerstones in. Okay, so when you do put your borders on, you do want to remember to still stay in your scant 1/4 inch that we did all of the blocks with. Now we've already got our first border on. I used the black. I think that's a nice offset with the black being in the belly chops. So I did that at 2.5 inches, which makes it a 2-inch finished border. Now my last border, well, last border for me, you could put on another border after this border, but for me, this will be the final border on this. And then I'm going to go ahead and work on finishing the teals so that I can get these under my long arm. So, and I've got other tutorials to do as well. And just as a reminder, before I forget to tell you, and I've been mentioning this in each of the other tutorials, for the downloadable sheets, come on over to Seaside Quilting on Facebook, join our group, and under files, on the tab, on the top tab, there's like discussion and some other things, photos, etc. If you scroll to the end of that bar, it will have files, and under files are each of the downloadable sheets. So it has the cover sheet showing the quilt itself. It has the yardage that's needed. This was based on 6 colors, so it has the yardage for the 6 colors. And then how we're going to be cutting out our strips. And this was for our sashing. And then goes into each block. And each block, you won't have my notes on it. You'll have the actual final pages. But since I already have these printed and marked, I've already put holes and put it in my binder, and I'll have it so I can make more of this quilt. And I do want to do one that is just random leftover pieces of other quilts. Make it scrappy with a sashing that all is the same, and I think that will break it up and make it really nice. And I'll be doing that later on this year, but for now I just need to finish this one and then the teals. So I've already done the same thing on the sides that we did for our other border. I've measured lengthwise to get the exact length that I'm going to need, and it's 4.5 inches wide, which will make a 4-inch finished border here. So for our cornerstones, those go on the top and the bottom at the ends. So what I did was I measured from the seam of the left side border over to the seam of the right side border, and then I added a 1/2 inch. So it was 52 from the seam here, adding this border to the seam here, and I added a 1/2 inch. I cut my cornerstones out at 4.5 by 4.5 inch squares. Now you could make a block that ends up being 4.5 by 4.5 inches. It will end up being a 4-inch finished square. I'm using just one color for my cornerstone, and I really like the coloring in this fusion that goes with the cobalt bally chops. And I believe this was cobalt fusions. So they go extremely well together. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to pin each of my corners. And I've made sure my seam on my border is going outward, so the seam between the cornerstone and my border is going left in the opposite direction. This way they can butt up against each other, and I will pin right there to make sure that those line up when I go to sew. I'm just going to double check to make sure that I have that pin in there correctly. Almost. There we go. And then I'm going to clip the end here and the side as well. And I just like doing the side because it keeps it nice and straight as I'm sewing along. Now I'm going to go all the way to the other end, and I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to line up my seams, butt them up against each other, and pin it. And then I'm going to clip this end, so I make sure that that stays lined up at the ends. And I'll put one on this side as well. Then I'm going to clip a few inches this way, then I'll come this way and clip a few inches, and I'll keep staggering until I reach my center and it's fully pinned or clipped, whichever you prefer. And I use several clips as I go to make sure that it's my seams, that my raw edges stay nice and straight up against each other. Okay, I'll finish clipping that afterward so that I can show you. Now I've already sewed the other end, so that you can see it finished. And then you'll just sew it across your scant 1/4 of an inch on both ends, and you'll end up with your final border along with your cornerstone. It does not want to come out and show itself. It's trying to hide. So now I have my cornerstone perfectly set up in the corner right where I wanted it to be. So it's just a matter of, for your top and bottom, to measure from the seam where your border got added to the other seam where the other border got added on the other side. Add a 1/2 inch. Make sure that you cut your cornerstone out to be the same size as your border. Now, if you've used a 3-inch finished border, which would be cut to 3.5 inches, your cornerstone would be 3.5 inches. Same if you decided 2.5 inches to cut your last border, then your cornerstone is going to be 2.5 by 2.5 inches. However, whatever the size is of that last border is the same size square that you will make sure that your cornerstone will be. And then it's just that measurement between the two seams going across the top, and making sure that you add that excuse me, extra 1/2 inch onto that measurement, because that's your 1/4 inch seam on each side when you add those cornerstones. And then it should meet up and come out perfectly straight for your final step. Now I'll take a picture of this hanging up. It's hard to see the entire quilt on my table. Even though I have a nice long table, it's really hard to get that finished shot with it all completed. But I am liking how the cornerstone came out. It's bringing the colors from the other blocks into the borders. And with all that beautiful sashing, I just think this is going to be a stunning quilt when it gets all done. And I haven't decided on the backing yet, but I may go with a batik for the back. And I'm going to see if I have enough of this valley chop. I do have one that is a lighter blue that I may combine the two of them. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how much of the cobalt valley chop I have left. I might have enough to make a backing, but we'll see. I'm not sure yet. I haven't measured what I have left. So that's it for today. This is the final step of our 2023 Seaside Quilt A Long. We will do another one next year. The rest of this year will be projects oriented towards the holidays and just fun projects overall that are enjoyable to make, along with some more tips and tricks throughout the year. And also some different blocks that I'll introduce here and there as we go, whether they be in 3-yard quilts or just to make blocks to eventually put together into a sampler quilt. Okay, so that's it for today. And until next time, I wish you happy sewing.